This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow at the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host, Maura Donley. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, today it's that time of season. Fall is upon us, and elections are getting closer and closer.
They are, yeah.
And are you able to find anything on your television at night except political ads?
I got rid of cable, so I totally streaming now, and you can avoid most of the ads that way. But don't tell anyone.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, today, to talk about the upcoming elections and the midterms, we have two of the best people in the whole state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to do it with. We have, first of all, Charlie Gerow, who is CEO of Quantum Communications and fresh off the gubernatorial campaign trail as well. Welcome, Charlie.
It's great to be with you, Charlie, and Maura.
Thank you.
And Brad.
And Brad.
Good to see you survive the competition.
I did. A few battle scars, but I'm doing well.
And we have with us Brad Bumsted, who is one of the most senior and knowledgeable reporters in Pennsylvania about politics and elections. Brad is the Harrisburg bureau chief for the Caucus and for Lancaster Online. Brad, will you tell us what the Caucus is again for viewers who are first-time viewers?
Sure. It's a watchdog publication on state government, do investigative reporting, to expose different problems that exist, and to tell people things they didn't know were coming up. For instance, the recent issue dealt with the 8% pay raise for legislators, judges, and certain elected officials that most people weren't aware is coming, but it's because of inflation. So they can thank Joe Biden for the increase that's going to legislators that'll put them up to $103,000 a year, over $100 for the first time.
Wow.
My. Yeah, I don't believe many people many voters know that.
No, I don't think they do. But it's a pleasure to be here with Charlie, who acquitted himself well on the campaign trail, I thought.
Thank you, Brad.
In all the debates, you know.
The debates are an important part of the process, and I'm looking forward to the debates this fall.
Do you think we'll see one in the governor's race?
I hope so. I mean, the people of Pennsylvania have the right, Brad, to hear the candidates up close and personal, unvarnished, unscripted, without their 30-second ads on television, and without somebody breathing in their ear what to speak. They have the chance and should have the right to see what candidates are really all about, and I think that's what you see in a debate.
Well, since you're fresh off the gubernatorial campaign trail, I wanted to start with you, Charlie, and wanted to ask you if you could please give us a lineup of who the candidates are and how the gubernatorial race is shaping up at this point.
Well, the two major party candidates for governor are the incumbent Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and State Senator Doug Mastriano, the Republican. There are, I think, three other candidates on the ballot representing so-called minor parties, but the two major party candidates are Josh Shapiro and Doug Mastriano. For the U.S. Senate, it's Dr. Mehmet Oz for the Republicans and the current Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, in what promises to be a major battle nationally because control of the U.S. Senate may hinge on this race in Pennsylvania.
So let's talk first about the governor's race. There are a lot of different issues that are being thrown around. What do you see as one of the distinguishing differences between the two candidates that the electorate might be focused on?
I think the most obvious one, and it's prominent given the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Dobbs, is Senator Mastriano believes that there should be no restrictions on abortions, that they should be banned, basically. And that should apply to I said restrictions, no exceptions to abortions. Whereas Josh Shapiro is pro-choice and favors abortion in a fashion, and is an advocate for it. And the two of those clash over that issue without question if they ever get together.
Charlie, I read that there are women under 25 years old registering in droves right now in Pennsylvania. They think that that might have an impact, that abortion might be the bigger issue. Well, what do you think about that?
Well, the abortion question is interesting because the Shapiro machine, with all the money they have, has tried to paint Doug Mastriano into a corner based on the comments that Brad reflected, which were made some time ago. And as you may know, Senator Mastriano has backed off of that a little bit. But the story that isn't being told is the story of Josh Shapiro's views on abortion, because he essentially believes that there should be more abortions. He's said that. You know, he wants increased access to abortion. Well, what does that mean? That means that we're going to have more. That's not a majority position among the vast span of voters across Pennsylvania. Most Pennsylvanians do not think that having more abortions would be a good thing, and especially more abortions paid for by the taxpayers. Josh Shapiro has a really pretty radical position on abortion, and I think that it needs to be exposed. And if it is, it'll be interesting to see how that cuts in the final analysis.
The unanswered question is whether he would oppose any abortions.
It really is an unanswered question. So let us see what the answer is. I think you find that out in the debate,
If there is one.
and we hope there is.
If there's no debate, how do we find out? He's
Well,
not talking to the press, and there's not going to be a debate.
I think there's going to be a lot more back and forth. We're 60 days in now from the general election. Things heat up. My friends in the Fourth Estate, I think, are going to begin to put the pressure on a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that Senator Mastriano will begin to utilize the mainstream media, for lack of a better term, to get his message out. He doesn't have the money to compete with Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro's been running for governor for the last however many years and has accumulated a pretty significant war chest. In order to compete with that, Senator Mastriano is going to have to get so-called earned media or free media through the regular channels that candidates go. And I think if he does, it will be to his great benefit. Not dealing with them is ultimately, in my judgment, a failed mission. And there's always the old adage, Brad, that I'm sure you've heard before, that you don't argue with people who buy their ink by the barrel.
Well, you don't, and I think that, you know, just to play devil's advocate here, I think the reason that Mastriano and a lot of other MAGA Republicans don't want to talk to the mainstream media, they think it's pointless. They think it's a trap, and they're just going to get beat up for doing it.
Well, Brad, talking about the gubernatorial race, we've talked about abortion. What are the other issues that are in play in the gubernatorial race, Brad?
Well, one it's not, and well, let's just say the January 6th attack on the Capitol, insurrection, if you view it that way, that because Senator Mastriano was there, even though he didn't go inside the Capitol, it's said that he crossed a police barrier, although the film that I saw showed the police barrier was down, so I don't know how you would know if you did that. But in any case, he was there and took busloads of supporters down, which is an opening for Shapiro to say, you know, look, this guy is an insurrectionist, and he's dangerous. That's what they say about him almost every day in fundraising emails. And that's something that's front and center and will be on ads through the election.
And this is what I think the media and the Shapiro campaign would like the focus to be. But the folks I'm talking to aren't talking about those things. They're talking about the high price of gasoline. They're talking about their inability to get groceries at the grocery store, and if they can, paying through the nose for them. They're concerned about their home heating costs this winter. They're concerned about their ability to keep the jobs that they have. They're watching inflation run through the roof, even though Joe Biden tells us that it doesn't exist. And they remember what happened during the lockdowns and shutdowns of Tom Wolf, and they remember that Josh Shapiro was his hatchet man. And that isn't lost on them. And those are the things I hear voters talking about. That's why Doug Mastriano won the primary, and it's why he has a fighting chance in November.
It is, and it's you could almost look at it as a race of Mastriano against Biden. I mean, that's the way he would like to view it. And because of inflation and the economy, that's why he has an outside chance to win. Although you'd still have to say, you know, Shapiro's a clear favorite based on polls and money that he has. Mastriano doesn't have much money to get his message out, but you know, if Charlie's right, and that's the number one issue, and I believe it is, it gives Mastriano a fighting chance.
Well, how, to both of you, Brad and Charlie, how is Mastriano campaigning, and would you compare it to Shapiro's campaign?
Well, Mastriano is campaigning on Facebook Live and with all his, he does interviews with far-right commentators in Washington with Fox News. And look, his supporters hear all that stuff. It gets out, but it's not getting out to the vast majority of Pennsylvanians. But maybe he doesn't care about that.
So he's not meeting with the Pennsylvania press?
No, and he has events, and Pennsylvania press go to it, but he has such heavy security at his events, private security, that press can't get to him, can't take pictures of him sometimes, and he doesn't answer questions. And I saw that firsthand on election night in Chambersburg when he won the primary. That's where you first started to see the influence of these security guys around Mastriano, who, look, I would say Mastriano and his wife Rebbe are nice people, okay, despite what they've been called. But here they are, they're surrounded by these guys with their earpieces that look like Secret Service, and they had a guy standing right in front of all the press row, so we couldn't get up and go talk to him.
That's not cheap,
No.
having that kind of security.
Although I think a lot of that early on was volunteer,
Okay,
but I think now they're paying for it,
interesting.
I believe.
Interesting use of campaign funds.
And one of the things that Senator Mastriano is doing is every day going to the voters directly, and his campaign thinks that that's enough. Bluntly, I would disagree with that, because you can't get to 13 million people in the course of a campaign. But he is out there aggressively going after individual voters in small towns across Pennsylvania on a bus that he's been driving around in now for several months, and I think with some effect. And Brad is correct. He's got a huge social media audience that he talks to every day, and those are his foot soldiers and those are his ambassadors. So in terms of the grassroots activity of the campaign, the Mastriano campaign far outweighs what Josh Shapiro is doing. And let's be clear about Josh Shapiro. He's been running for governor for probably 20 years. He got elected to the Pennsylvania legislature. He immediately began running for county commissioner. People said, well, you finished your term? Well, you didn't want to talk about that. Got elected county commissioner, and the same question came up. Are you going to finish your term? Well, he didn't want to talk about that because he was running for attorney general. And when he got elected attorney general, he began running right away for governor. And during the last campaign, his re-election for attorney general, the number one question was, will you finish the term? Will you do the job you're asking the voters for? And he refused to answer. Well, we know why, because the second his hand came down from taking the oath, he was off and running for governor. And he's been trotting around the state on a very regular basis, not doing his job as attorney general, with security paid for by the taxpayers.
Well, and it's rumored that this is just another stepping stone, too, so he's going to have some answers.
There's no
He's gonna have
question
some
about that,
answers,
Maura.
yeah.
He's made very clear,
Yeah.
since he was in junior high school, I think, that he wanted to be the first Jewish president. And in order to run for president of the United States on the Democrat ticket these days, you have to be as far to the left as you can humanly get. So people ought to realize that if Josh Shapiro is elected, he's going to move so dramatically to the left that it's going to make heads spin. He will be the most liberal governor, progressive governor, woke governor, far left governor in the country.
Although he's not there now. One would say he's been
Pretty much.
Oh, of course not. He's running for office,
Right,
Brad.
left of center.
but
Well, but
just-
still, so is John Fetterman, and he doesn't, and he's pretty extremely left. So,
But John's not running for president.
No.
Josh Shapiro is.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're going to take a break here, and we'll be right back in a minute.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
And we're back with Behind the Headlines. On this part of the program, Maura, you want to turn to, let's talk about the U.S. Senate for a little bit.
Yes.
Brad, can you tell us a little bit about the background of these two candidates that we have, two major party candidates?
Sure. John Fetterman was mayor of Braddock, a small town in western Pennsylvania, a tough town, as he notes in his ads. And he after that, ran for U.S. Senate before finished third in a primary, which gave him some, impetus to go further and run again. He runs for lieutenant governor first, gets elected, and he still is the state's lieutenant governor. As lieutenant governor, the first thing he did was go on a listening tour of Pennsylvania about marijuana, whether he thinks people believe it should be legalized. Well, you could do a poll and find that out a lot sooner and a lot less, probably less expensive than that. But in any case, that's who he is, and he is far left. If Mastriano is far right, Fetterman is far left. Dr. Oz, of course, 15-year TV personality, made by the shows that he was on, but especially he had his own show actually, and he was a heart surgeon. He's retired now, but apparently was a well established and well respected heart surgeon who also did a little business on the side with different concoctions that he thought were helpful to people, and sold those. And he was in a crowded primary for U.S. Senate, and it became a brutal two-way contact test with Dave McCormick, a Wall Street CEO, a hedge fund operator. And the two of those just battered each other to the point that when he came out of the primary, Oz was, beat up pretty well, and his negatives were sky high. So he started off with that, which was sort of hard. Fetterman didn't have nearly as hard a race as people thought he would with Representative Connor Lamb, and it didn't. So he came out of it pretty good and came out of it with momentum. So the polls early on showed Fetterman leading Oz by as many as 11 points, but it since has narrowed.
Charlie, the other day, Fetterman stood up at a rally and he displayed a new T-shirt that he hopes his followers will wear, and it said "Fetter Woman," and he introduced himself now as John Fetterwoman. Is this part of his? He's trying to appeal to females.
I missed that. This is the woke culture upon us in massive ways, Charlie. Brad laid out the story pretty well. The thing that's interesting about both John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz is that they both have won very, very tight elections. John Fetterman was elected mayor of Braddock by a single vote, and it might be remembered that when he got elected lieutenant governor, he beat the incumbent lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania in a Democrat primary. So they've had some tough elections. Oz won the primary by less than 1,000 votes, and he not only was beat up a little bit through that process, and I think it's important to note that Dave McCormick came out immediately in support of Mehmet Oz and has been very, very helpful to that campaign, as has Jeff Bartos, who I think is now his campaign chairman. Fetterman and his folks were able, in the early days of summer, to define Mehmet Oz as a carpetbagger. And it's never good when your opponent is defining you before you define yourself. That's switched a little bit, because now the emphasis and the focus is really on the health of John Fetterman, who had a stroke just before the primary election and has had difficulty in recuperating from that stroke. And while every Pennsylvanian wishes him a full and complete recovery and pray for that, the people of Pennsylvania have a right to know exactly what his condition is. And I think that if the Oz campaign takes this issue on in a serious note, and bluntly, they haven't done that yet. They've had all these snarky little back and forths.
Too much, yeah.
And the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette described it as cruel, and I don't think that was too far from the mark. These are young people that are having fun with the campaign, but there's that great line from the American president, this is serious business, and this seat is absolutely pivotal in that serious business. And so the serious question of is John Fetterman capable of serving in the United States Senate, physically capable, has to be answered. And the only way that's going to be answered is if he, A, makes his attending physicians available to the media to answer all of their questions, and B, makes his personal medical records available so that people can make an informed decision about whether or not he's capable of serving.
I would add a C in there, holds a debate, so that people can see
Well,
him firsthand.
he said that he's going to have a debate, Maura. We'll wait and see as to whether or
Yeah.
not that actually
Hasn't
occurs,
really
but
picked a
they've
date.
scheduled it so late in the process that an awful lot of folks will have voted
Right.
because of early voting, and I think I know where you're going with that, and I totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's an issue, doing it so late.
The big issue in this particular campaign is control of the U.S. Senate, isn't it, guys?
Absolutely.
And what will happen if Oz wins? What will happen if Fetterman wins, Charlie?
Well, if Oz wins, the Republicans hold a seat. There's no pickup there. It's a seat held by Pat Toomey right now. So it's simply a hold. And that's one of the problems for the Republicans nationally right now. As you know, not all the senators are up for election. Only a third of them are. And the ones that are up for election right now, by and large, are Republican holds. So if Oz wins, you have a net zero. If Fetterman wins, the balance tips to the Democrats in the Senate, and you've now got to pick up 2 seats in order to get a gain in what is now a tied situation in the U.S. Senate. And if the Democrats take control of the Senate, Jenny bar the door, because the filibuster's going out the window, all sorts of really crazy legislation is going to be put to the fore.
And if Republicans take the Senate, it's going to be a roadblock for some of the things that Biden wants to do. It won't just be Senator Manchin. There'll be others who will be, blocking some of the bigger spending things he wants to do.
Well, what do you see as one of the biggest issues that these candidates are facing? What do they have to sell?
Well, I think it really does boil down to these personal things. I mean, the big issues, folks really understand the divide, and Brad's already pointed out what a deep difference there is philosophically. You have a pretty far left Democrat and a centrist to right Republican, and there's a lot of running room in between. But this issue of John Fetterman's health, I think, is the one that's going to define the campaign ultimately.
I believe that's the case also, and it's not. And what he's described as his problem and the after effects of the stroke, and we don't know for sure that's exactly all that he faces, but it's auditory. It's some stroke victims it's ambulatory, it's getting around, but he doesn't process words that he hears. He said words get meshed together occasionally. Well, that's pretty important.
Yeah.
If you're in a debate or if you're in the Senate.
If
Right.
it becomes
In
quite
life.
evident to the candidate, quite evident to party leaders in the Democratic side, that he is not up to completing this campaign, can he be withdrawn? How would the Democrats have
Not
a-
at this stage.
Yeah.
Too late. Too late.
There was some talk of that, whether it actually occurred. I didn't do the reporting on that to know that it's a fact, but supposedly there was some talk about that early on after his stroke. But what it would take would be a convention, more or less, of the Democratic Party, much like occurred after John Hines died in a plane crash. The Republicans had a convention here in Harrisburg and nominated Dick Thornburgh to run for Senate. So they would nominate their person to take over. And of course, some of this reminds me of Harris Wofford, the Democrat who nobody knew, running against Thornburgh, just in the sense that in the governor's race, Mastriano almost on a daily basis, takes a beating in the mainstream press that he so despises, as Thornburgh did in the closing weeks of that Senate campaign. And I remember back then looking at it and thinking, how can this guy win?
Yeah, the difference, of course, is that was a special election.
It was.
This is a little bit different. And because John Fetterman has not been withdrawn, he really can't be. He's going to be on the ballot. But Pennsylvania has an interesting history there, too, because we've actually elected people that passed away prior to the general election and whose names were still on the ballot.
Well, Charlie, do you think that Pennsylvania, that a candidate can successfully present himself and be elected presenting himself as someone who's symbolized by tattoos and a hoodie? And we compare that to John Hines, who Brad just mentioned. There couldn't be a more stark contrast between Senator Hines from Western Pennsylvania and John Fetterman from Western
And
Pennsylvania.
he's not from Western Pennsylvania, he's from
From
York.
County.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I mean, look, he's an unconventional candidate, and that's frankly his quote-unquote shtick. And it's been very successful for him. He's
it's
done
working
very
for
well
him in the
him.
polls
It's
so
worked,
far.
and it's worked
Yeah.
for him. And people say he looks like the doorman at a biker bar, but he does have a Harvard degree. So I mean, there's a little bit of woof and wove to John Fetterman, and he is a compelling candidate to a lot of folks.
Yeah, and it's a segment of the population, working class folks, others, think they like that. I've heard people comment on, yeah, so he's different. He's different than most politicians. But I have friends who are pretty conservative who think he's going to represent us in the Senate. Are you kidding me? Dressed like that? I mean, it's just how he's dressed. I'm not criticizing it, but
I remember, isn't it true, that he had to borrow a suit from the governor when he assumed his position as lieutenant governor.
I thought the governor took him out to get
Yeah, I was
money.
going to say, he didn't borrow a
couldn't
governor.
borrow.
He didn't borrow a suit from the
Oh, that's
governor,
true.
Charlie.
It would
It would
fit
be
on
the
his
right-
right
Like
leg.
one arm for
It would be the right size. That's right. The governor bought it for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So my first exposure to John Fetterman was a Levi's commercial from many, many years ago. And if you,
Yes.
you Google that, it's a pretty interesting study of Braddock, Pennsylvania, and what he was doing there at the time. So I'm from Western Pennsylvania, so we all thought that was really cool that he was in a Levi's commercial.
Well, is it not true, Brad, that Braddock, Pennsylvania isn't as healthy as he portrays it to be?
Today?
Yes.
I don't know for a fact. I'd love to do a story and look at the data and the figures on that. But I have a good friend who knows a lot about Braddock and had been there, and he said, you drive down the street in Braddock, it's not much different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And of course, Fetterman wears it as a badge of honor that he was mayor in this tough little town, and he says Dr. Oz wouldn't last an hour there
Yeah.
in one of his ads.
Right.
Nobody would. I'm sorry. It's still a tough little town. So
Well, it is, but an hour, I think, I'm surprised Fetterman hasn't used that as an opening to go out there
Yeah.
for an hour and set up a camera.
Tell us about Braddock. You're a Western
no,
Pennsylvanian.
I have to ask my one question of Brad before we sign off here
And
today.
we have 30
Yes.
seconds, 45 seconds
I always
left.
ask you, do you have any bombshells coming? Is the caucus working on anything?
Oh, we're working
never
on some
tells me,
things,
but-
and not like the bombshell before that you asked about that I gave you a little piece of, but we're working on some things that are explosive but not bombshells.
Okay. that's
Charlie,
great.
might
That's
we
good.
see
Something
you
to
back
look
on the
forward to.
campaign trail anytime soon?
Well, I'm helping out some other candidates. That's going to be my involvement on the campaign trail.
That's great.
And on that note, we want to conclude this show and thank you for tuning in today and invite you back next week for another show, Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.